A few months ago, I was asked to help a large high school having problems with vandalism in the boys' bathroom. The boys were tearing soap and paper towel dispensers off the walls, flushing vape pens down the toilets, graffiti on the bathroom stalls, all during the school day. And then it all came to a head when a student brought a boombox and started a dance party in the bathroom during lunch. About 60 to 70 teenage boys swarmed, crowding into the bathroom. They damaged sinks and toilets, the stalls and the dispensers. They flushed so many vape pens down the toilet that by the next day, the entire school's sewage system backed up into the outdoor corridors. Due to the sheer number of people involved, there was no real proof of who was to blame. There wasn't a person or a group that they could pin responsibility on. So we had to bring people together and address the situation to find out what was going on, to understand the unmet needs in the school that was making this happen, and not just once, but over and over again. In this session, you'll learn how to facilitate a restorative circle to address harm in big and small ways in classrooms and across your school campus. In this session, we'll talk about restorative circles. We'll start by getting clear on what is a restorative circle, and then we'll discuss when to facilitate a circle. We'll talk about who should participate in the circle, and then we'll discuss why restorative circles are important. Finally, you'll learn the nuts and bolts of how to facilitate a restorative circle in your school. Now, the vandalism situation at the high school that I just shared about needs to be put into some context. They were just starting on PBIS, so they didn't have any systems in place to prevent the vandalism yet. They had just recently established clear expectations of how to behave in the bathroom, but they didn't even have a bathroom pass system yet to verify who had permission to be out of class. They had only taught expectations through school-wide lessons once, but they didn't have any kind of positive reinforcement system that we could have used to improve the situation, maybe like rewarding the number of days without incidents. And they couldn't really give consequences to the students involved because they didn't know who they were. Without a clear bathroom pass system and inconsistent supervision at the bathroom itself, they could only guess at who was responsible. While implementing PBIS at Tier 1 could have prevented the vandalism problem for the most part, we needed to address the situation immediately. Restorative circles are hands down the best way to respond to harm in a school, and they are one of the several restorative practices that we've been talking about in this series. These restorative processes include classroom circles for community building, maybe instruction or even problem solving, affective language, restorative chats, restorative mediation, restorative circles, and restorative conferences and reentry circles. These practices are on a continuum, ranging from low intensity, less planning, classroom-based strategies, all the way to higher intensity, more structured and mainly office-managed interventions. In this session, we'll be talking about restorative circles and how they help us come to understanding and make things right. So what exactly are restorative circles? Restorative circles are probably what people most commonly think of when they hear the term restorative justice or restorative practices in schools. Like this picture of Eric Butler, master circle facilitator, trainer, and a friend of mine from Talking Peace. He's sitting in a circle together with students to solve a problem, commonly called talking circles, harm circles, problem-solving circles, responsive circles. In circles, you hear what happened, you learn how everyone's been affected, and you decide how to repair the harm. Interestingly enough, research done by RJOY, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, found that with circles, they saw a 60% reduction in suspensions and a 97% compliance rate for following through on the agreements made in the circle. In our MTSS pyramid, restorative circles fall into Tier 2. It's considered a Tier 2 intervention because it's only for selected students who were involved or impacted in the incident, not for all students like in a classroom circle. A restorative circle is a more intensive process than a classroom circle because it might involve students from across the school, adults, and other community members, and it's generally facilitated by someone outside of the classroom and not the classroom teacher. So let's talk about when to facilitate a restorative circle. Circles are used in schools when you need to respond to a moderate to severe incident of harm. So when you think of harm, think beyond just harm caused by a student or a group of students, but it can also include events that impact the school. I've used circles in schools after the death of a student or a teacher to process grief and loss. You can also address community unrest like riots, looting, or protest. In my last district, we held circles across all of the high schools when students were threatening to stage large-scale walkouts because of upsetting political reforms. We were able to prevent them from taking to the streets by engaging in meaningful dialogue. We can hold circles to talk about violence on campus or in the community. Maybe we need to address issues of widespread sexual or racial comments being made. In California, we needed to use circles to help us process and welcome students back after natural disasters like wildfires and earthquakes. Restorative circles allow us to respond to harm in schools, such as cheating and stealing. I have participated in circles that have addressed really difficult bullying situations with amazing, transformative results. You can also address vandalism and fighting and more. So, who should be included in a restorative circle? So simply put, in a restorative circle, you're going to bring together the group of people who were impacted. Usually that means including the person or persons who caused the harm, the person or persons who were harmed, and then supporters for each, like friends, classmates, parents. I've seen students ask a favorite teacher to come to be there as a supporter for them. You also may want to include select school staff who were involved or impacted by the incident. And maybe you need to invite other community members if they were also impacted. And of course, the facilitator will be there. So let's talk about why restorative circles are important. So let's face it, if you've been in education any length of time, you've seen a lot of ways that schools handle disruptive, harmful behavior. And circles are not usually on the top of that list. By introducing circles, you'll do more than just address problem behavior. Circles are a powerful alternative to traditional exclusionary discipline. When we listed all of these issues that schools deal with earlier, many of us have seen schools respond by sending the student home or on a suspension or other exclusionary tactics. Instead, circles offer a response that brings about accountability and healing. And if you remember the social discipline window, human beings thrive in contexts that have high support and high control. And in schools, that looks like asking kids to be accountable for their actions while providing them a lot of empathy and support. Circles actually teach empathy by providing an opportunity to hear someone else's story and to more deeply understand where they're coming from and why they did what they did. Circles are actually better for victims because they honor the person who's harmed. In the study of victimology, victims of most crimes say that they need an opportunity to express their feelings, acknowledgement from loved ones about what happened, assurance that what happened was unfair and undeserved. They need direct contact with the offender to hear the offender express shame and remorse, answer questions about the offense, an assurance that it's not going to happen again, and give them a sense of safety. When we use traditional approaches to discipline, we forget the person harmed, and it's a missed opportunity of healing for them. Finally, circles are inclusive. Today's youth culture uses a lot of exclusion to manage conflict, of unfriending someone who maybe we have differences with. And many youth and adults are ill-equipped to address interpersonal issues, hurts, or slights without shutting the door on relationships completely. In fact, many young people feel a sense of acceptance in their group by rejecting others from it. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how to facilitate a restorative circle. In your support materials, I've included a restorative circle script for you to use as a starting place to plan your circle. As the facilitator, you're going to ask each person to respond to the restorative questions from their perspective so that the group can come to an understanding of what happened and how to repair the harm. The group, and not the authority figure, determines the accountability plan to make things right. And in the end, the facilitator will write up the agreements made in the circle and then have all the participants sign it. In your support materials, I've also included a restorative agreement form that you're welcome to use. It's important to follow up after the circle to monitor that the commitments are fulfilled. As you know, before you start in on any restorative process, you need to do prep work. We talked about that in detail in our last session. Prep work is when you meet with each participant individually and then you determine what type of restorative conversation you need. Is this a problem best addressed with a mediation because it's a mutual conflict just between two people? Or is it a larger event impacting more people and a circle would be better? We're going to talk about conferences in the next session and how they address very serious incidents of harm at your school. And then finally, you're going to gain agreement to participate and to follow the guidelines. Guidelines are what help us feel comfortable and safe. The questions that we ask in the circle will require vulnerability, so people will feel more reassured by agreeing to follow guidelines. During the prep work phase, you're also going to explain why are you meeting, what questions will you ask. I also tell them who's going to be there, where the meeting will be held, and then you really clarify it's not a punishment. You can also contact parents if you feel that would be helpful. In your support materials, I've included a prep work guide for you to follow, along with a role play to practice in a staff meeting. So, for example, in our vandalism situation at the high school, I worked with the administration to pull together a list of who they thought was involved, maybe who was seen to be there at the time, as well as the names of students who were impacted and who would be vocal about their experience. And then we invited students who represented an important part of the school community. Different grade levels, boys and girls, not just top students, but leaders of other social groups. And then we prepared them along with several staff members, including the school custodian, assistant principals, the school district director of maintenance and operations, and a few teachers. During the prep work, we shared with everyone the vandalism problem, and then we asked if they'd be willing to take part in the circle. We stressed that this would be an opportunity for all of us to learn a little more about the needs of everyone at the school so that we could try to make changes to meet all of those needs. Everyone that was approached agreed, so by the time we held the circle, we had about 40 people, all prepared to participate and speak openly about the needs in the school. The structure of a circle usually goes something like this. First, you state the purpose of the circle. Then you review the guidelines that everyone's already agreed on during the prep work phase. You do a quick check-in to get everyone's voice in the room, and then you dive into the work of the circle, which is basically just going to be asking the restorative questions. And then it ends with brainstorming some solutions, making some agreements. Then you do a checkout and a closing. So let's look more carefully at each of these steps. First, you state the purpose. We want to be clear what we'll be talking about and why. That's fair process. You want to make sure that you talk about it in a way that focuses on met or unmet needs and without shame or blame. One good way to do this is to use an affective statement that you learned in the earlier session. When I facilitated the vandalism circle, I said, over the past several months, there's been ongoing issues in the boys' bathroom, including vaping, alcohol, vandalism, loud music. Many people have been impacted by this. This will be an opportunity for all of us to learn a little more about the needs in the circle. We want to get the needs on the table so that we can try to make some changes to meet those needs. So after you've clearly stated the purpose of the circle, then you gain agreement on the guidelines and you post them where everyone can see it. Common examples of guidelines might include respect the talking piece. So talk about why we all deserve to give and to receive. And when you have the talking piece, it's your turn to share. And when you don't, it's your turn to listen. Speak from the heart. Share what's true for you from your perspective. Listen from the heart. Hold back on assumptions and listen fully. Confidentiality. What's said in the circle stays in the circle. And then I always like to ask, are there any other agreements that we need to make as a collective for this circle? The next step is the check-in, and it's psychologically important. To approach a meeting like this is an incredibly vulnerable gesture, so we ease into the difficult restorative questions by asking a low-risk, lighter check-in, like, to start, I'd like to have each of us share your name and tell us what's your favorite song right now. Or, if you could go on vacation anywhere, where would you go and who would you take with you? It psychologically gets your voice in the room so that later it's easier to speak up. Check-ins also build empathy and connection because it allows us to start the whole process with an understanding that we're all more than the current conflict. We have hopes and we have dreams, strengths, and goodness, this event aside. By beginning with a check-in question, it allows all participants to be their best selves before starting the hard work of the circle. After the check-in, you'll have what we call the work of the circle, where you ask the restorative questions. What happened? Like what's been going on? Who's been impacted, in what ways, and what needs to happen to make things right. So the reason that most circles start with the question, what happened, is because no one else can truly define the harm other than the people who were impacted by it. We need to hear everyone's perspectives. Now, working in schools for over 20 years, I know we have a tendency to try to move as fast as possible. And sometimes it's really tempting to assume, hey, we were all there, we saw what happened, or to skip the question because it brings up tension or arguing or chaos. What happened is an important question and it really shouldn't be skipped. One tip I have for you to make your circle go smoothly is to have the person or the people who did the harm go first to answer that question, what happened? If they've been prepared well by you, they're going to come ready to take responsibility for what happened. It also helps the victims feel less on the spot and less vulnerable because they don't have to go first. And when other people hear them taking ownership and responsibility, it seems to lessen the indignation of the other people. It eliminates that false preconception about the offender's attitude, like, oh, they're not sorry, or oh, they're just going to make excuses. So for that reason, it does seem to calm everyone down. It's as if it's no longer a fight, but instead it's this common goal to make things right and move forward. Another good reason to have the person who did the harm speak first is that if families are included in the circle, it avoids defensiveness of parents when they hear it in their own child's words. There are a few ways you can ask what happened, depending on the situation. If this is a large group, you might want to say, I have asked so-and-so and so-and-so to share the facts about the situation. Then we'll use the talking piece to allow for anyone else interested in adding what they know about the facts. Again, start with the person who did the harm if you can. If it's a more generalized issue, you can start with the people who can articulate it well and prepare them in advance. The next question we ask is, who's been impacted and in what ways? Here you're really trying to get the participants of the circle to share personal feelings about what happened and get to the real issue. You can ask this in a variety of ways, like, what's been the hardest part for you? Or how did your family and friends react when they heard about the incident? Or just, what are the main issues for you? And then you pass the talking piece around the circle in order and allow everyone to answer. Sometimes I'll prepare someone in advance to start because I think that they're going to set the tone well, and I'll hand them the talking piece for them to begin. When I facilitated the vandalism circle, people shared a range of impacts. One boy said that because the boys' bathroom felt so unsafe, he couldn't drink water at school all day, leaving him with headaches from dehydration. Another girl broke down crying when she described how disgusting it was to have the sewage backing up into the corridor after the boys flushed vape pens down the toilet. She said the smell made her so nauseated. It was so strong that the students couldn't even focus in class. The new school custodian said that she had to throw away her new shoes and all of her clothes after cleaning up the sewage flood. And the director of operations shared that the vandalism had cost the school over $23,000 that school year. Sometimes in larger groups, it can take a really long time to assess the overall impact. So if you think it's appropriate, you can use scaling, a show of hands, or other strategies to get input. So for example, you can ask, on a scale of 1 to 5, how big of an issue is this for you? 1, not a big deal at all, it doesn't bother you. 5, you notice it every time and it bothers you. Or on a scale of 1 to 3, how important to you is it that people show up to yard duty on time? You can also ask for a simple show of hands, like raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about or you've experienced this. Then ask, okay, everyone, look around. You want people to see what the community cares about. Now, a couple tips here. Persistence matters. It's okay to allow for silence and ask follow-up questions. Go around more than once. Ask, is there anything else anyone wants to add? Also, if you can't identify who did the harm, like who the culprit is, like in my vandalism example, focus on resolving the problem and not catching the culprit by including people who represent various groups impacted. Never try to get kids to confess something in a circle with everyone staring at them. The truth is, if the circle runs well, whether people come forward or not, change will happen because of the process. So for example, in the vandalism circle, some kids actually did admit to the part that they played. One boy admitted, yeah, I was the one who brought the boombox that day. He started the dance party in the bathroom. But then he went on to say, I did it because there's nothing to do. No fun activities at lunch anymore. So then it kind of came out in the circle that the teachers who used to run the noontime lunch activities had stopped this year. So the only activities that were happening were cheerleaders dancing, which only appealed to a small group of kids, leaving a lot of other kids to feel that they were no longer a valued part of the community. Then other students admitted to making messes and throwing trash because they said they were disgusted and embarrassed by how poorly the school campus was being maintained. The next question that follows is, what needs to happen to make things right? What we're really asking here is, how can we repair the harm and ensure that it doesn't happen again? You're going to write down the suggestions for the solutions and any agreements that the group wants to make. This is the part of the circle that would include any consequences that are going to be delivered, but you need to think about consequences as focusing on repair, obligations to the community, and then what's really needed for everyone to feel safe. You also want to pay particular attention to what needs to happen so the behavior is not repeated. Restorative justice practitioners would call these underlying causes unmet needs. In PBIS, we seek to understand the underlying causes for behavior by trying to determine the function. Why is this behavior happening? And here is where Tier 2 and 3 PBIS strategies can help. Rather than trying a bunch of interventions and crossing your fingers hoping it's going to work, why not use evidence-based interventions, self-management systems like check-in, check-out, or SAIGs, small group counseling, or classroom modifications. And with really serious intensive needs, try a behavior plan, individualized counseling, or wraparound support. When we ask ourselves what needs to happen so this doesn't happen anymore, we should choose only the best, most evidence-based interventions possible. Finally, you'll simply summarize what the group agreed upon for solutions to repair the harm, adding in the supports and the interventions that the students need. Here you can assign who's responsible for following through and then set a time to check back on the issue with the participants. You can do that as a group or individually. In the vandalism circle, agreements were made to resume lunchtime activities that were more inclusive by having students from the circle form a committee. The director of operations and school administrators invited the students to join them on a walkthrough of the school to see what could be done to improve the overall cleanliness of the campus. Some of the students who were responsible for the vandalism volunteered to stand with the campus supervisors and help monitor the bathrooms during lunch on a rotating schedule. Now is the time to check out and close the circle. Checkouts are just like the check-in. You're just trying to get a read on how everyone's feeling and allow any last thoughts or feelings to be expressed. You can just say, now we're going to check out. Can you please share one word about how you feel about our process today? And then allow them to share. A closing in a circle might be something like, I want to thank everyone for being here and congratulate you for successfully completing the circle. It takes a lot of courage to own up to our actions and participate in this process, and thank you. Closings also could be a quotation. For example, when I closed the vandalism circle, I read aloud the quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. And then after closing, it's important to have some sort of celebration, a breaking of bread together. This often means providing food like pizza or popcorn and allowing the participants to mill around and talk and interact. This not only honors the hard work and celebrates the repairing of harm, it begins to normalize our interactions with each other. You'll see people who couldn't even look at each other before the circle laugh and sometimes hug each other. The connection as a community has now overcome the tension and negativity that was palpable before the circle began. There's a path forward now. Restorative circles are a way to respond to harm, manage tensions and conflicts, and restore relationships in a school community. As a result of our circle, the vandalism that had plagued the school for nearly a year came to a complete halt as each group began to follow through with their commitments and they became a community once again. By answering the restorative questions, what happened, who was impacted, and how can we make things right, we address who's been harmed and what needs to happen to make it right for everyone involved to feel safe moving forward together. Because as James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced.